走り出せ走り出せ空高く鳩と差し
Hi guys, it's Wasabifold here again, and what I'm going to be presenting to you guys is my presentation for Gear 5, what I call SPRINGMAN. Let me just say right away is that this will not be all about Bellamy's springs. Even though the springs do play an important role in this theory is not about Bellamy's springs primarily. It's about fixing Luffy's weak points as a fighter in terms of where he currently is and who he has to fight against in the end of the series. So understand that this is not all about Bellamy's springs, and I'm not going to be rehashing ideas as to how cool it would be for Luffy to spring around. That's not what this theory is about. Also, for those that are a little bit more impatient, for the beginning of this video I'm going to be talking mainly about my inspiration for this gear, how I conceived it, what patterns I looked into as far as the gears are concerned when conceptualizing it, and things that I considered as far as Luffy's Devil Fruit and his usage of it up to this point in the series. All of that were considered, so if you want to skip past all of that and you just want to hear about the gear itself, go right ahead. I'm going to allow you to do so. But I urge you to stay around because it does do a lot for justifying the gear itself. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about is, will there be a fifth gear? And the answer is yes. Gears from the very beginning have been a reference to the gear shifts in a car, and in a manual car there are usually 5 forward gears, and with every gear Luffy has pushed his body to a new maximum potential and pushed his Devil Fruit's usage to a new maximum, but he's also put more strain on his body. Gear 5 will put even more strain on his body and his Devil Fruit, but it will push him to a new level of power, and therefore Gear 5 will be the final gear. And because it's the final gear, you have to consider how this gear will help him match up against future opponents, those being Shanks and Blackbeard. Right now he currently has a poor matchup against these guys. Shanks is a swordsman. Luffy's normal rubber defensive has no effect as far as the swordsman is concerned, and even though Gear 4 was able to take an athlete thread, that is just a slicing substitute. You would not expect that it would be able to take a sword slash from Shanks, especially with how strong everyone thinks Shanks' haki is gonna be. So this gear has to do a lot for helping out Luffy in that area. As far as Blackbeard is concerned, Luffy has no defense against Blackbeard currently. He has no resistance to shockwaves at all, and haki is not going to be enough to take a quick punch from what is essentially probably the strongest blow for blow paramecia in the series. So in my opinion, Blackbeard and Shanks are 2 important opponents when considering this final gear, because he will have to be using it against them, and it will have to be tailor made to beat those opponents. So those are 2 things that I considered while first conceptualizing the gear, but I also took time to take a look at the gears themselves and how Oda has built them, and I found 3 patterns that could do a lot as shed light on what Oda could do in the future. First is the blood bone muscle pattern. Everyone knows that every single gear, Oda takes one aspect of Luffy's body and has Luffy manipulate it to achieve that gear. Gear 2nd was his blood flow, Gear 3rd were his bones, Gear 4th were his muscles. In my opinion, Gear 5 will also take one aspect of Luffy's body to manipulate. Another pattern is that each gear also tends to improve one aspect of Luffy's fighting style and take out another shortcoming in his fighting. Gear 2nd improved his speed, Gear 3rd was his power and striking strength, Gear 4th is his maneuverability, not just of his body but also his attacks. His attacks were very linear pre-time skip, to the point where he struggled with that at Marineford, where he realized that if he attacked Mihawk, he would have his arms cut off because of how linear and predictable his attacks are, and one-dimensional they are. Gear 4 did a lot to alleviate that, because now he can fly through the air, he can fly anywhere, and he can also change the direction of his attacks in mid-air. So Gear 4 really did improve the maneuverability of his attacks and his body to a new level, where the other gears did not do that. And I think Gear 5th will also improve some aspect of Luffy's body to a new level. And one final thing to consider is that every gear takes inspiration from something in the real world. Gear 2nd was pumps, Gear 3rd was a balloon, Gear 4th was a ball. Every single gear takes some usage of rubber in the real world and uses it as inspiration for the building blocks of the mechanics and the visual representation. So all of that Oda considers when he's building his gears. And one other thing is that since this is the final gear, I do think that Luffy will be pushing his body and his Devil Fruit to its absolute max. He'll be using every single skill in his arsenal as far as his devil fruit is concerned in this final gear. So there's so much to talk about, so let's just get straight into it. Now the first thing I'm going to be answering is, what part of Luffy's body will he be manipulating to use this gear? That answer is his skin, and he will be using vulcanization to manipulate his skin. And the reasons for vulcanization are obvious. One, vulcanization is a far more elastic and durable form of rubber. In fact, it is about 10 times more rigid, and this serves to help Luffy against taking a quick punch from Blackbeard. Vulcanized rubber is far more shock resistant, and Luffy is going to have to be shock resistant to take even one quick punch from Blackbeard, more so than he even is. And right now, Gear 4 might seem very durable, but really it's just a balloon. It's him holding air in his muscles. Imagine if shockwaves, powerful earthquake level shockwaves, were running through his body. It would probably pop his muscles like a balloon. Honestly, I feel like Luffy is most outmatched against Blackbeard as he currently is with all of his skills currently, and against Shanks, because Shanks is a swordsman who has such a powerful haki that even Luffy's normal haki would not be enough to defend against Shanks's swordsman attack. So he has to have something that can help him out as far as improving his skill set. And in my opinion, Gear 5 and vulcanization will play a part in improving Luffy's durability to help him better take on these fighters. And the reason why is his skin is because it is one of the last areas of his body that he hasn't manipulated yet. And it also helps when you think about it as far as Gear 4 is concerned. He takes his normal rubber and he fuses it with haki to increase the durability or increase the elasticity. But if he was to increase the elasticity manually and then imbue it with haki, he would have an even more powerful material to use for his own body. And now we've got an idea as to how he would go about the building blocks of this gear. We have to also consider how effective it is. And right away you can see a problem with vulcanization. Vulcanization lacks mobility because he can't stretch like he usually could because of how rigid vulcanized rubber is. Luffy will have a problem. If he was to just vulcanize without doing anything else, he would have a problem of attacking with the usual range that he usually has. Even though he would be able to take a hit, the gear would suffer by itself because he would not be able to move around as fast as he would need to. He would not be able to avoid attacks as well as he need to, and he would not be able to land attacks as well as he could because of this problem. And this is where Bellamy's springs come into play. Using Bellamy's springs, if he was to take his arm and take his legs and shape them, actually coil them just like how Bellamy has his springs coiled, not like the imitation the anime did, but actually coil them just like Bellamy's springs and then vulcanize, he would have a form where his body and his arms would be set in that vulcanized spring form. And when he recoils his hand in a much similar way to how he does with Gear 4, he would be building up so much elastic potential energy with his spring attack that he wouldn't have to worry about stretching to his usual lengths, in much the same way that Gear 4 manages the same thing. However, this will be so much more rigidity in the rubber that he would not be able to blast his hand forward like Gear 4. It would stop dead short. Like I said, the extension of this rubber when it compares to his normal rubber is much reduced. When he launches his attacks, he has to be dead on close, and therein lies the problem with this gear, is that even with the springs he has a problem with range. But I think if there is enough power, he can even generate another skill of CP9, and that is the Rokugan. We saw Rob Lucci do this, where he took his muscles and he just flexed them and he did this blast or shockwave in through Luffy. What if Luffy could generate a Rokugan with a vulcanized spring with haki and all that improvement attack? So it doesn't matter that the attack doesn't land or that he isn't close enough. The shockwave from the Rokugan would fly out, probably even more powerful than Rob Lucci could ever create, out and hurt the opponent regardless. So this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that he'll turn his forearms and his legs into springs, coil them up, vulcanize, and I'm sorry that I don't have any fan art because I can't draw, but then he'll be able to generate power. He'll be using the elastic power of a spring instead of the internal resistant pressure of a ball. He'd be using that elastic power of the spring to fire attacks at opponents, and it doesn't matter that it wouldn't be able to stretch because he could potentially generate a Rokugan-like power from each of his punches. And this is why this whole gear kind of falls under this whole idea of shockwaves, manipulating shockwaves, shockwave absorption, shockwave creation. And this actually plays into what real life thing Oda will be basing the gear off of, and that is the tires, or should I say a rubber tire, and its suspension system, the shock absorption in a car. Basically, the tires and a car work together to give the car a smooth ride over bumpy roads. The vulcanized rubber is very malleable, but yet tough enough to take the rigors of hitting the road, and the shock system with the steel spring is used for making sure that the vulcanized rubber stays in contact with the road as much as possible and not become offset by the actual bumping on the road. And the two of those work together to create a smooth ride. Likewise, I think Luffy will be able to take shockwave hits in this form, and he'll be able to keep that power within him and store it in his springs, and then he can release it back at the opponent with even more powerful attacks. So this is how it counters Blackbeard. Blackbeard's quick attack would be able to hit Luffy hard in this form. He'd be able to take that attack, store that potential energy in much the same way that the shock absorption on a car does, and then fire it back at Blackbeard. And with the Rokugan skill, it could potentially even hit him from range. But another thing that's also ailing this form is the actual, environment itself. If he was to generate so much power in these vulcanized springs that are imbued with Haki, obviously, he might be creating too much power for the environment to take this spring effect. Because I'm saying that there's going to be so much power, if he springs off the environment, he could potentially destroy the area around him just by springing around, because the springs are producing so much power, even more so than Bellamy's spring fruit. And that's the thing about Bellamy's fruit, is that Bellamy's fruit is perfectly designed for springing. But Luffy is going to be doing his own version, which is going to be more powerful and not designed for springing. So there comes a problem of if the environment could even take it. And this is where I think his awakening comes into play. Luffy's power, his basic devil fruit power, is to make his body elastic so he can stretch. Therefore, his awakening will be to make the environment elastic. And that is how the awakening comes into play. Because when he springs off the environment, if he was to turn it stretchy before he springs off, he can spring off and get the power and get the full impact of the propulsion without worrying about breaking the environment, and that would allow him to spring off multiple areas and keep that momentum and that speed, and keep him high enough as far as mobility is concerned to where he can get off those powerful shockwave based attacks. And what's also important is that this also helps with countering Blackbeard, because Blackbeard's skills cause a lot of collateral damage, especially if he's in a close quarters fight going all out. And if Luffy was to turn the environment elastic, he could protect the environment, because it would be more able to stretch and move with Blackbeard's shockwave attacks and not break apart so easily. So I'm saying that this form will be used against Blackbeard to counter Blackbeard's Goro no Mi. So now we have vulcanization, increasing his durability so he can take these hits, the springs from Bellamy's skills being incorporated in to get over the mobility factors and the lack of range factor, and also awakening being used to help counter all of that stuff, all being rolled into one. So this gear pushes Luffy's body to the absolute max. So that is my theory for Gear 5, SPRINGMAN. Tell me what you guys think. I wish I had some fan art, so what I'll do is I'll probably ask for you guys to, now that you've heard the gear, if there are any of you that are artistically gifted, make a sketch of what I'm thinking, so that we can better visualize and get this theory out there. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And that's been my presentation for Gear 5, what I call SPRINGMAN. Alright, thank you guys for listening. This is Wasabifold signing out.